The Last with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. We have Rob Bonta joining us tonight. He is, I guess, the busiest state attorney general in the country, which makes sense. He's got the biggest state. He's got the most jurisdiction, but he has some very big ones on his docket right now.
He certainly does. I don't know when he sleeps, but I enjoy reading all the coverage about everything he's working on.
Well, the big case now, obviously, is the mail-in ballot case, which has taken a very important turn today. And so that's where we're going to begin with him.
That's great. I know so many people are wondering. I'm getting text messages about it. I'm sure you are. So I'll look forward to hearing what he has to say. Maybe we can all take a breath for a moment, I hope.
We'll see. Thanks, Jen.
We'll see. Thanks, Lawrence.
What Abraham Lincoln gave us, Donald Trump wants to take away. The first significant use of voting by mail occurred during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln trusted the Postal Service to deliver that mail. He trusted those envelopes. Our postal system is older than the United States itself. The interstate mail system was established a year before the Declaration of Independence was written, with Benjamin Franklin serving as our first Postmaster General. In what would surely be a horror to Benjamin Franklin, we now have a Postmaster General who has put in writing his eagerness to violate the law for Donald Trump because Donald Trump told him to. From the start, the Postal Service has been operating under laws passed by Congress that require all mail with proper postage to be delivered. And now Donald Trump's favorite Postmaster General, David Steiner, has written a new rule for the post office, which Donald Trump ordered him to write in an executive order, in which David Steiner promises that the Postal Service will violate the law and not deliver mail if that mail contains election ballots sent to or from someone who the Postmaster General has decided should lose the right to vote in America. If you randomly walk into federal courthouses around the country and just look in at the criminal proceedings, one of the oldest federal crimes with one of the largest records of criminal prosecution in federal courts that you will encounter is mail fraud or tampering with the mail in some way, blocking the mail, some kind of interference with the delivery of the mail. That's a federal crime. A postal worker in Massachusetts pleaded guilty just 2 months ago in federal court in Boston to the crime of failing to deliver mail. The specific charge the postal worker pleaded guilty to was obstruction of mail. One count of obstruction of mail. That postal worker waiting sentencing faces a possible sentence of 6 months in prison for one count of obstruction of mail. Postmaster General David Steiner is now eager to obstruct millions and millions of pieces of mail. The biggest crime of mail obstruction in American history. This perilous moment in history. That is what California's governor called this moment when Donald Trump is poised to illegally seize control of our elections by seizing control of the 13 million ballots that are delivered by mail in California elections alone. On Monday, the Republicans on the Supreme Court rejected an attempt to block Donald Trump from committing this crime against the Constitution and against the people of the United States. The Supreme Court Republican majority said it was just too soon to know if what Donald Trump was going to do was illegal because his Postmaster General had not yet written his new rule about how to handle mail-in ballots. Never mind that he had actually written that rule on Friday, and the Supreme Court ruling was on Monday. They could have read it, but they didn't. So they pretended it was still too soon. The new rule that he was ordered to write by Donald Trump, who also told him what that rule would say. Donald Trump put all of that clearly in a written executive order that the Supreme Court saw. The Supreme Court could see in that order exactly the crime Donald Trump was planning to commit. But because the Postmaster General had not yet, when they wrote their opinion, put his participation in the crime in writing, the Supreme Court said it was too soon to stop the crime in progress. And the states objecting to this would simply have to wait until the Postmaster General actually puts his criminal plan in writing, which the Postmaster General did. He's written a 95-page rule that was released on Friday, giving him control over all ballots mailed in America. The Postmaster General, according to this rule, will look at the ballot envelopes when the Postal Service receives them and then decide which of those envelopes the Postal Service will deliver. The 24 states objecting to this have filed a new lawsuit in court today in Massachusetts in federal court. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell filed the suit in federal court in Boston today. The state attorney general representing the largest number of voters who use the mail is California's Attorney General Rob Bonta, who will join our coverage tonight. Their lawsuit says, quote, "For more than 250 years, the Federal Postal Service has provided reliable, vital services to millions of Americans and served to bind the nation together through the personal, educational, literary, and business correspondence of the people. Congress has defined the exclusive circumstances under which the United States Postal Service may refuse mail. The Postal Service's right to exclude letters or to refuse to permit their delivery to persons addressed must depend upon some law of Congress. And if no such law exists, then it cannot exclude or refuse to deliver them." Congress enumerated the specific and narrow categories of non-mailable matter, including, for example, matter declared non-mailable by criminal statute. Neither mail ballots nor mail ballot envelopes fall into any non-mailable category outlined in statute. Case closed. It is as simple as that. Only Congress can authorize the Postal Service to refuse to deliver some category of mail, hazardous materials, for example. As soon as the Postmaster General saw Donald Trump's illegal executive order, his job, his moral duty, was to say to Donald Trump, "It is illegal for you to order me to refuse to deliver mail if the states do not create lists of voters for me to check, and if the states do not create ballot envelopes that I approve of." All of that's illegal. And the reason it's illegal for the Postmaster General not to deliver mail is because it's a crime for him to refuse to deliver the mail. He could have told Donald Trump that immediately. But David Steiner is now an eager accomplice of Donald Trump, disgracing the position created in this country by Benjamin Franklin. David Steiner had a life-defining moment delivered to him when Donald Trump sent him an illegal executive order that was both illegal and unconstitutional. And David Steiner showed us exactly who he is, exactly how craven he is, exactly how dishonorable he is. He is another disgraceful and now permanently lifetime disgraced Trump accomplice, trying to commit the crime against democracy that Donald Trump wants him to commit. Having the Congress on your side in a legal argument is one thing. Having the Constitution on your side is everything. The lawsuit against Donald Trump and the Postmaster General says, quote, "States bear primary responsibility for elections under the United States Constitution. The Constitution's elections clause provides that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators." That's it. That's what the Constitution says about it. And nowhere in the election clause of the United States Constitution is the word president mentioned. The lawsuit points out that Donald Trump has tried and failed to do this through the Congress. The lawsuit says, quote, for months, the president has relentlessly urged Congress to pass the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the Save America Act, which seeks to enact some of these goals. In addition, the president has called on Congress to severely restrict the ability of voters to cast ballots by mail. Congress has declined to adopt the Save America Act, much less the other voting restrictions for which the president has advocated. Having failed to persuade Congress, the president has continued his efforts to unilaterally impose federal control over elections. On March 31st, 2026, the president issued the executive order that led to the regulation at issue in this case. It could not be clearer for the Supreme Court now. When Donald Trump failed to get a majority Republican Congress to do what he wanted, he simply issued an illegal order to a postmaster general who would do whatever Donald Trump wanted. The lawsuit says, quote, Congress has never exercised its elections clause authority to limit mail voting or authorize the United States Postal Service to monitor or control the transmission of mail ballots. Rather, Congress has only expanded and protected mail voting for military and overseas voters. Neither the president nor the United States Postal Service may control eligibility to vote by mail, nor may either impose mandates on state and local election officials implementing state law governing voting by mail. Postmaster General David Steiner violated Postal Service law by failing to consult the Postal Rate Commission before making a major operational change. But David Steiner didn't care. Donald Trump wanted this done, and David Steiner was going to do it no matter what the law said. The Postmaster General violated the laws governing the Postal Service, something no other Postmaster General has ever been accused of. The lawsuit describes the new postal rule that the Supreme Court will now have to evaluate. Here it is. The rule requires states to enroll every eligible mail voter with the United States Postal Service and tasks the United States Postal Service with compiling them into state-specific lists. It further establishes design requirements for ballot mail envelopes, including the requirement to use trackable intelligent mail barcodes, and provides that the United States Postal Service must pre-approve states' ballot envelope designs when election officials send ballot mail to voters missing from a state's United States Postal Service list or use envelopes that do not comply with the new standards. The United States Postal Service will not deliver those ballots. The lawsuit says, quote, the rule violates the Constitution and federal statutes many times over. One need not look further than the White House to explain the United States Postal Service's unprecedented and unlawful conduct. President Trump has long opposed mail voting, expressing that it would lead to the end of our great Republican Party. Since reassuming office, the president has aimed to, in his words, get rid of mail-in ballots. State attorneys general often have to struggle to connect with voters when explaining what they do for a living or what they did that merits re-election or possibly election to another office. So much of what a state attorney general normally does involves obscure legal issues. The biggest criminal cases in a state are almost always handled by local district attorneys, not state attorneys general. California's attorney general is now involved in some of the very complex corporate litigation involving an antitrust case objecting to the merger of Paramount and Warner Brothers. And just today, California's attorney general, along with other state attorneys general, reached a settlement in a lawsuit against Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, in which Zuckerberg agreed to paying a settlement of as much as $17 billion and to change Facebook and Instagram features that have been used to, in effect, addict children to their social media products. But in a typical year, a typical state attorney general doesn't handle a single case that most voters care about or even know about. But not now. Not in this perilous moment in history, when, if our right to vote survives, it will be thanks to Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell and California Attorney General Rob Bonta and dozens of other state attorneys general in between Massachusetts and California who are now fighting for the most important thing that any state attorney general has ever fought for in this country. They are fighting for nothing less than the preservation of democracy itself. Leading off our discussion tonight is California Attorney General Rob Bonta. General Bonta, thank you very much for joining us tonight on this very busy week for you and very busy day. Your lawsuit says it all, but what are the aspects of this lawsuit that you think should turn this now, should turn the Supreme Court around and say, yes, we can now see that what they're doing is illegal?
The U.S. Constitution, the plain language of the Elections Clause, which, as you rightfully have set forth, that says that the states, and to a degree Congress, determine the time, place, and the manner of elections. So the states determine how elections shall be run and administered. The president has zero authority in that regard. The United States Postal Service, zero authority to do anything but fulfill their ministerial role to mail all mailable items. Of course, that doesn't include things that are explosives and hazardous materials and other things, but ballots that represent the fundamental right to vote of eligible Americans are completely mailable. So this is, in my view, an open and shut case. And I think this, if it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, will be seen just like birthright citizenship was, where there's a U.S. constitutional clause right on point that governs the issue and will determine that the president's unlawful actions and unconstitutional actions should be struck down. I will say that what the U.S. Supreme Court did earlier this week on the emergency docket, on some call it the shadow docket, was procedural only. All they said was that the attorneys general brought their case a little too early and that we needed to wait for a final rule to be issued by the United States Postal Service. That rule has now been issued as of last Friday, and we were in court today bringing our lawsuit. We prevailed on the substance of this issue in our lawsuit on the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court has now returned it back to its starting place at federal district trial court on a procedural matter. And we believe that the substance that won the day the first time around is going to win the day the second time around. We win on the merits here. This is not a close case.
So I've seen the California mail ballots many times. Every California voter receives one at home, and we all have the option of using the mail-in process or taking it and dropping it at an early voting location or bringing it in on election day. And so I just we have an example of it I think we can put up on the screen of what these what these envelopes look like, because this is what Donald Trump's trying to get control of. He's trying to have the Postmaster General design your envelopes. You already have some pretty complex designs here, especially on the return envelope ballot, which does have a barcode on it. Do we know what that barcode is? Is that just an address information, or is there more than address information in that barcode?
The barcode that we use is, as I understand it, a unique identifier for the individual who votes, but it's supposed to be an anonymous vote for the voter in terms of the substance of the votes of the vote and what the how the voter what they opt for with the propositions and the measures and the candidates on the ballot. So we have a system in place now, and we have universal vote by mail, as you mentioned. We believe in removing hurdles and barriers from that stand in between eligible voters and the fundamental right to vote, the right from which all other rights flow. It's fundamental to who we are as a country, as a nation. It's fundamental to democracy, and this unlawful and unconstitutional final rule by the United States Postal Service would require us, with 70 days before the election, to redesign the envelopes you just showed, to redesign them in the image that U.S. Postal Service says, to put a different barcode on there. And it throws our upcoming election potentially in chaos unless we can get an order blocking this unlawful our final rule, and we're confident that we will get that. We're ready. We're prepared. We were ready for this day and this moment. We expected something like this to occur, and that's why we were in court today. We got today, the judge, at our request, is issuing an expedited briefing schedule. So we will have our temporary restraining order ruled upon, or at least a hearing on it, within a week. So we brought a restraining order today. The federal government will have to respond within a day or two. We'll submit our reply thereafter, and we'll have a hearing this time next week.
In a worst case scenario, if the Trump judges on the Supreme Court, the Trump majority, were to rule against you, is it even possible for California to conduct an election by mail under these new rules in the time frame that you'd have to comply with those new rules?
I don't see how, and I think there's quite a bit of gaps and silences in what the United States Postal Service is seeking. Even if we wanted to put all of our resources, time, attention, staff into trying to comply, we don't know what the goal is. We don't know all the requirements yet. The USPS, the United States Postal Service, hasn't fully disclosed everything that's necessary. So that's why implementation of this rule at this time, with respect to the upcoming election in November, will throw potentially our elections in chaos. But we're confident that we will be able to block this blatantly, brazenly unconstitutional and unlawful order, or final rule, in short order in the coming days and weeks.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta, America's busiest Attorney General, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence. Good to see you.
Thank you. Coming up, the laziest president in history told us something we already knew today when he said, quote, "I have no time schedule, none." Yeah, we knew that. That's next. Today, the laziest and sleepiest president in history said this: "I have no time schedule, none." Yeah, we knew that. That comes as no surprise to anyone who has watched the most disorganized and laziest president in history, who, because he doesn't schedule nap time, often appears to take his naps right in his chair in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room while other people are saying worshipful things about him. In one of those utterly pointless telephone interviews in which we learn absolutely nothing important with a reporter today, Donald Trump said this about his war in Iran: "I have no time schedule, none. I'm not in a hurry. I have no time schedule at all." That was the believable part, but he also told this lie: "We are winning very big." Donald Trump, being the stupidest president in history, is the only one who has said in the middle of a war, "I am not in a hurry for the war to end. I'm not in a hurry to bring our soldiers home." The war that he started, in a fully demented Trumpian attempt to self-certify his military credentials, Donald Trump posted this picture of himself today using the lying phrase military academy. Donald Trump in military academy is a lie. He was in a rich kid's boarding school, a high school in suburban New York. The United States of America has military academies at West Point, at Annapolis and in Colorado Springs, where the Air Force Academy is located, Donald Trump could not possibly have gained admission to any one of those military academies. And instead, he went to a high school where they engaged in cosplaying every day as imaginary members of an imaginary military. The uniform he's wearing in this stupid picture that any sane person would know is an embarrassing picture, is an invented costume. It's like a Halloween costume. Has no meaning whatsoever. Imagine you're in service on one of those Navy vessels still on patrol in Donald Trump's war, where there have been all sorts of problems on the ships with food supply and water supply and the basic necessities of life. And you see Donald Trump posting this clownish picture of himself in high school as his claim of authority to be your commander-in-chief on the same day that he says, I'm not in a hurry. I don't care how long you have to stay on those ships. We have new reporting at MS Now tonight about the sailor who jumped off the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln on August 3rd. According to the sailor's wife and charging documents reviewed by MS Now, quote, a sailor who jumped from the USS Abraham Lincoln this month in what his wife describes as a suicide attempt is now facing disciplinary action from the Navy. The wife said her husband is facing non-judicial punishment for violating articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The charging documents, which were reviewed by MS Now, show that the sailor has been accused of violating Article 83 for malingering, which is defined as a service member intentionally faking an illness or hurting themselves to avoid work, duty, or service, and Article 86 for absence without leave, which means a service member failed to be at their required place of duty without proper authority. I think they're insane for doing this to people who need mental help, the wife told MS Now. Instead of giving them help, this is just another huge stressor. The wife details how her husband was evacuated and spent 5 days in Naval Medical Center, San Diego, quote, during that stay, she said, medical staff monitored his vital signs, but he did not see a psychiatrist or a therapist. He was told to report back to work immediately after his release. His first therapy appointment came on August 26th, nearly 2 weeks after he arrived back in San Diego. Joining our coverage now is former retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former commander of U.S. Army in Europe. He's not an MS Now military analyst. General Hertling, you're in the middle of a war started by the President of the United States, and the President of the United States says, I have no time schedule, none, and he's in no hurry. How does that land on the service members serving in this war?
Well, first, Lawrence, what I'd say is that the president doesn't need to give us a date or a timestamp. He needs to give us an end state. Good strategy isn't calendar driven, but the conditions we are attempting to achieve is critical to the mission. As a commander in combat, I wouldn't tell a subordinate unit to take a hill by 5 o'clock in the morning unless it was critically important to the rest of the mission state. I would say take the hill. So this is the kind of information that we don't need from our president. To say that he doesn't have a time stamp on when this war is going to end or what will come next is an indicator that the plans and the synchronization of efforts are not well developed. And I say that hesitantly because I don't know what the plans are. Neither does the Congress of the United States or the American public who should be supporting a war.
He is essentially saying, I'm lost. I have no idea what happens next. And our presidents in our most difficult wars, including Vietnam, the wars where we were not making progress, one thing we knew about each of those presidents, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, is they were working every day trying to figure something out, and in some cases going in the wrong direction. But they were not just sitting there saying, I have no plan, I'm not in a hurry.
Yeah, the application of our national power, which comes in the realm of diplomacy, economics, information, and the military. It's the famous DIME acronym that they teach at the war colleges, are all synchronized, Lawrence, and that's what we haven't seen. We have seen an emphasis on the military for the first several months of this conflict. We haven't seen a diplomatic approach that's feasible or anything beyond dysfunctional right now, because the individuals that were sent to negotiate were not welcomed by the Iranians, and they didn't have a plan in terms of what they were trying to achieve. The informational approach has been chaotic as well. We haven't informed our allies. We haven't informed the American people or Congress. So if you don't have that information going out on a public sphere on what you're trying to accomplish, the military action, which has been significant over the last 6 months, isn't synchronized with the rest of national power. And that is why we can probably conclude there doesn't seem to be a plan for reaching an end state or a final objective. And that's why the president says he doesn't have a time for when this might end. And we don't even know what the required end state is now for ending this conflict.
And we have polling, 65% saying they want it ended right now. Donald Trump is saying to 65% of those voters, I don't care what you think. Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, with Donald Trump's approval rating hitting an all-time low in new polls, Donald Trump's plan to help Republicans win midterms is to make the midterms a referendum on America's most unpopular politician, Donald Trump. We'll see how that brilliant idea might work in North Carolina, where our next guest, Roy Cooper, is running for United States Senate. We'll be right back. Republican candidates for the House of Representatives and the Senate are worried now that Donald Trump has decided to campaign in the midterm elections, not for them, but for himself. The Atlantic reports Donald Trump gathered his top political advisors in the Oval Office early this month to solve a problem of riches, how to spend his super PAC's $400 million political war chest with fewer than 100 days to go before the midterm elections. The solution Trump settled on was to lean into the Democratic strategy of focusing on himself, resulting in a Trump midterm election ad blitz that is set to be rolled out soon from MAGA Inc., the main repository of Trump's political fundraising, according to people familiar with the discussions, all of whom insisted on anonymity to describe internal conversations. So Donald Trump plans to try to convince voters that he's doing a great job as president while he is currently suffering the worst disapproval polling numbers of his presidency. Joining us now is former North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. He is the Democratic nominee for United States Senate in North Carolina. Governor Cooper, I know you were expecting to run against Michael Whatley, but apparently Donald Trump wants you to run against him. And nationally, he has a disapproval rate of 64%. In your state, Donald Trump's disapproval in North Carolina is 54%. So a guy with a 54% disapproval rate wants to make this campaign Roy Cooper versus Donald Trump. Are you ready for that?
Well, that's definitely an on-brand strategy. But really, when you look at these candidates who have been trying to stay in his good graces, it's really not a whole lot different. My opponent has been talking about prices are down, we've defeated inflation, tariffs are a great economic tool. We've got to continue the Iran war. You know, it reminds me of the old saying we used to have in Eastern North Carolina is violating the rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. I think people know how they feel, and I'm not sure that any amount of advertising can convince them that they aren't suffering from inflation. But I think it's really important, Lawrence, that we do not underestimate the sheer amount of money that is going to be coming into all of these swing states and congressional districts, particularly with this latest Supreme Court decision that allows these joint committees to have unlimited spending. And now they are scheming. We're going to have a case in the Supreme Court soon to give all of these billionaires and big wealthy donors who have put this money in a discount in buying ads. We've got to make sure that we are ready. We need grassroots support. People can go to roycooper.com to help us with that. This is still in North Carolina going to be a tough race. We've only had 2 Democratic senators in almost 40 years. And regardless of this strategy, which, I hope and don't believe that it will work with the people of North Carolina, we've got to be ready to make sure we win these races and take back a Senate majority.
You have been running consistently a few points ahead, roughly 5 points ahead in the polls in North Carolina. These are early polls, obviously, and everything gets much more serious in October. We'll be paying more attention to it then. Why do you think North Carolina voters appear to be ready now for a change in the United States Senate?
I think they want a return to decency. I think they've had enough of this bravado and name calling. I think they want government to work. What they're seeing now is a government that's leaving them behind and ripping away their health care and making their grocery prices and utility rates go through the roof. And they want someone who they've seen here in North Carolina. I've developed some trust with the people of North Carolina. They know that I try to work in a bipartisan way and that I'm going to represent all North Carolinians. I believe that they are ready for change. I believe that they are ready to put in the checks and balances that the framers of the Constitution intended. They are ready for members of Congress and the U.S. Senate to work with this president when they can, but stand up to him when they need to. And right now, the leadership of the House and Senate is letting this executive go wild. And what's happening is the right to vote is being threatened, and we're in a war with no strategy. And we have a $40 trillion debt that's driving up the cost of borrowing. People are tired of it. They want to change. I was at a local Canvass kickoff, and I asked him, what are people saying to you? He said, they're mad. They're mad. And when you ask them if they need a ride to the polls, they say, no, I'm going to vote. And I think it's going to be important for us to make sure that we get those people to the polls and to allow those voices to be heard, because there's a lot happening in North Carolina and at the federal level that may try to challenge that and may try to suppress that. And the people have to have I'll show you attitude about this. You're not going to take away my right to vote. It's important that people do that now.
North Carolina Senate candidate Roy Cooper, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Coming up today, as his mental capacity continues to spiral downward, apparently Donald Trump called Canada, yes, Canada, quote, one of the worst countries in the world. That's next. In a telephone chat with Glenn Beck today, Donald Trump said this about what the Wall Street Journal is calling the dumbest trade war in history.
Look, I don't know how you feel about Canada. They are one of the worst countries in the world to deal with. And this has gone on for many years. They don't have anything that we have to have. Okay, we can get by. I mean, there are a couple of things that would make it a little inconvenient, but we could get them elsewhere.
A couple of things, including 20% of our oil consumption. Joining us now is Tim O'Brien, senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion and the author of Trump Nation. He is also an MS Now political analyst. Tim, we're seeing Donald Trump completely lost in this situation with Canada. And the only president in history who thinks Canada is difficult to deal with. Canada has been the country that every single American president had the easiest time with of any country on the planet.
Because they're easy to get along with, Lawrence. Canada and Mexico together represent our most significant global trading partnership. Canada is a democracy. We have shared history with Canada. They have a rich culture. They have been good neighbors in the deepest sense of that term. They have sent their own soldiers into wars to support us. And for what, well, I know the reason. I suspect the reason that Donald Trump is engaging in yet another one of his 2026 self-owns on top of the tariff debacle of the spring and the Iran war that is ongoing and is probably the most tragic mess of all of it. He is just so full of vindictiveness, and he sees enemies around him everywhere that he cannot discern between friend and foe. And he did this, when he was a 2-bit real estate developer in Manhattan. He did it when he ran his casino business. He did it throughout his career, but the consequences were contained to a relatively small pond. He's doing it now as president, and the world quakes when he does it, because he's messing with rational and fairly well organized economic partnerships that affect people's jobs. It affects their standards of living. It affects their wages. It affects their sense of the future. And they're powerless really to do anything about it. And he knows it. And he's surrounded by people who keep coming up with ways to give him unilateral excuses that to this point, the Supreme Court and the Republicans in Congress lack the courage or the sensibility to check him around, so he can continue to go on his merry way. And he's seeing the numbers in front of them, and he can't control them. There's this great line in the science fiction movie Blade Runner 2049, where one person is talking to a mere mortal and says, "You can't stop the tide with a broom." And Donald Trump is sending people like Scott Bessent and Kevin Warsh on economic issues, Scott Blanche on legal issues, Pete Hegseth on military issues, to try to stop the tide with brooms. But it's not lost anymore, because the facts are staring voters in the face, and Democrats in the face, and Republicans themselves in the face.
Tim O'Brien, perfectly put. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We'll be right back. Tim O'Brien gets tonight's last word.